Welcome to the SImple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables. And whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a café au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 79th episode of the SImple Sophisticate. And as promised, last week I told you that January was going to be a month all about happiness. We are continuing down that trail, and today is all about the how of happiness. A helpful marketing ploy to sell a book, an article, or a product is to smack the word happy right there on the title. After all, the United States Declaration of Independence declared the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to be at the foundation of our young country. People want to feel happy, and they want to figure out how to feel happy. To feel happy is to experience a rush of specific chemicals and a creative balance of these four specific ones: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. However, each one of us has our own unique equation that will lead to the most happiness, as explained by Dr. E.P. Seligman in the book Authentic Happiness. What's the formula? You may be wondering. It's quite simple. Happiness is a set range based on our biological parents, so something we really cannot change or shift. But there are two other components. Don't worry. Or if you're thinking, oh, my parents are so happy, that's fantastic, wonderful news. Circumstances of your life, with how you're dealing with your money, how you're handling and interacting in your relationships, your health, your religion, your faith, your spirituality, the world at large, and how you are playing a role in it, your job security, those kind of things, that plays a huge role in your level of happiness. And the third is also within your control, and that is voluntary. Factors under your control, such as how you're dealing with the past, how you look to the future. In other words, what's your state of mind and how do you handle your emotions? So the equation is H equals S plus C plus V. Now, in knowing this equation, I wanted to dive deeper into set factors of how we can improve the happiness in our everyday lives. So after devouring Dr. Seligman's book, Authentic Happiness, I came up with a list of 18 things you and I can do today and continue forward into the new year to improve the happiness in our lives. Now, let's get started. Number one is understand the truth behind marriage and happiness. Study after study purports that marriage is a precursor for happiness. However, there are many ways to look at the data, and as Stephanie Kuntz points out in 2013, said studies deserve a closer examination. The National Opinion Research Center reported in 2004 that after surveying 35,000 people, 40% of those who were married reported being, quote, very happy. Or let's look at the data another way. 60% of those married did not report being, quote, very happy. Kuntz revealed that in a study shared by Council of Contemporary Families in 2013, quote, almost 80% already reported high levels of well-being before getting married, with no significant increase afterward. In other words, don't get married in hopes of finally becoming happy. One can be single and happy as well as married and happy. It all depends on the details that we'll discuss in the remaining 17 ways to improve the happiness in your life. So number one is to understand the truth behind marriage and happiness, and don't fall into the trap of, if only I were married, I'd be happy. Not really the case. Not really the case. Number two is money matters to a point, and then it doesn't. In 2013, the book Happy Money was released and revealed that there is an average amount of annual income that will improve the level of happiness in one's life. Set at $75,000 a year annually, obviously that's going to depend on the cost of living, so that was an average across the United States. The more money one earned would not directly improve the level of happiness beyond that point. In fact, a study released just last week, those that define themselves as happy were more likely to value time than money. In other words, experiences or material items provoked an increase in happiness levels. So number 2 is money matters to a point, but then it doesn't. Number 3, understand the power of adaptation. The hedonic treadmill, as Seligman labels it, can be a tempting foe as we're seeking a happier way of living. Making the errant assumption that more wealth, better looks, a bigger house, more clothes, etc., will equate to more happiness is a fool's pursuit. What will improve levels of happiness is the experiences you cultivate with your good health, with your money should you buy tickets to travel or see a play, anything that deepens relationships, causes moments of wonder and awe, and just opens your eyes and teaches you something, provides an opportunity to grow. So number 3 is understand the power of adaptation. Number 4 is limit the shortcuts. While probably not a surprise, achieving what you desire without a hindrance plays a role in diminished happiness or the inability to derive happiness from this particular successful outcome that came easily to you. A handful of examples shared in authentic happiness as to exemplify shortcuts to feeling good are drugs, chocolate, loveless sex, shopping, and television. These serve to remind us that while we can enjoy a piece of chocolate or the latest episode of Downton Abbey, it isn't the foundation. These shortcuts to happiness are not the foundation of a lasting happiness. They're just temporary, and we need to understand what their power is and make sure we don't give them too much power in our lives. So number 4 is limit the shortcuts. Number 5 is experiencing lows can enhance happiness. We don't want to hear this sometimes, but I think for all of us, I have a feeling every single person who is listening today has gone through some hardship. Maybe in hindsight, it didn't seem that big, but at the same time, maybe we have gone through some significant hardships. Upon reflection, most hardships actually enhance our happiness in the long run. Assuming that ensuring our lives are void of any and all negative emotions as a means to feel more happiness has actually been proven to be incorrect. While prolonged and intense feelings of negative emotions make it far more difficult to feel happiness, when we do feel happiness after having known the contrary feeling, the level of happiness is increased. So the next time you're going through a rough spot, see it as an opportunity to have a more appreciation for when those good times roll around, because they will roll around. Number 6 is be able to forgive. When we forgive, we make room for the feeling of contentment and satisfaction. But when we choose to dwell in bitterness, hatred, pride, and wishing for revenge upon someone, we leave no room for those positive emotions to emerge. Allowing ourselves to forgive and move on is in many ways allowing our minds to forget so that it can focus on cultivating a life of positivity and optimism. So number 6 is be able to forgive, because ultimately that's the best gift you can give to yourself, no matter what that person has done to you. 7, strengthen the skills of trust, confidence, hope, and faith. Last week's episode 77, focused on how to cultivate trust, and for good reason. When we strengthen the skills of trust, confidence, hope, and faith, we are strengthening the happiness muscles. In other words, when we see negative events in a temporary fashion, this is a good thing, right? A negative event in a temporary fashion. For example, we think, oops, my lack of sleep last night did not help me do best on my test today. Rather than having a negative permanent response, I'm so stupid, no wonder I failed, we are practicing optimism. And the same goes for the flip side, having a permanent positive response, I'm resilient, I'll figure a way out of this, rather than a negative temporary response, I just got lucky. When we practice this, we are practicing the skills that will lend themselves to more favorable outcomes. And the right type of habits will become habituated. We don't have to think about it. Before we realize it, we will have created a happy life for ourselves and those we make contact with on any given day. So number 7 is to strengthen the skills of trust, confidence, hope, and faith. Number 8, understand and embrace learned optimism. For anyone who is logical, rational, and cringes at the maxims that get tossed around for positive thinking to improve one's life, learned optimism is more likely what will make more sense to you. I know it did for me. It's one thing to be positive. For example, I know my wisdom guides me to the right decision. But if you don't have the wisdom to make the right decision, then how well will that serve you? Learned optimism is much like being a detective. You need evidence, concrete pieces of evidence to remind you that no, you are not stupid. The fact is you had a bad day because you didn't prepare, you didn't sleep well, and therefore you couldn't focus and didn't have the information available to demonstrate your understanding. In other words, the truth matters. But sometimes, scratch that, often we overact, and that is not helpful. So number 8 is understand and embrace learned optimism. Number 9 is to exercise your strengths. Strengths are skills that you would do without having to put them on your to-do list. Strengths are what come more innately to you. No one has to poke or prod you to do them. And because you enjoy doing them, you can lose all track of time when you're engaged in them. So exercise your strengths. Happiness resides in time and moments that you are engaged with their strengths. And as I'll talk about later in today's episode, doing this tied with something else that we're going to mention is going to enhance your happiness even more than you may have thought possible. So number 9 is to exercise your strengths. Number 10 is to embrace aging. As Maury Swartz pointed out in Tuesdays with Maury, being young isn't easy. It can be fun, it can be adventurous, but if we spend the time in our youth well, aging becomes even more enjoyable. Why? Emotions are less intensely felt, whether good or bad, and we bring with us our experiences and knowledge about ourselves if we took the time in our youth to understand ourselves. So embracing aging, no matter what that number is a huge component to being more happy in your everyday life. Number 11 is to stop giving the past power it doesn't have. If we assume the past is destined to repeat itself only when it has treated us poorly, we will never have the courage or the curiosity to seek out a happier route. Dwelling on the past is similar to being unable to forgive and move on. We have a finite amount of energy and emotions on any given day, so choose to expend your energy for the better. The truth is, we have the power in the present to shift the direction of our lives, no matter where or what circumstances brought us to this point. So number 11 is stop giving the past power it doesn't have. Number 12 is pay attention to endings. I thought this was very interesting. When I saw it initially in the book Authentic Happiness, I was like, this actually is worth considering. I had never thought about it, and it gave me pause. Whether we are graduating, finishing a project, ending a relationship, or moving on to another job, another town, anything, whether it's good or bad reasons that it's ending, pay particular attention to how each of these chapters in your life end. Pay homage to the relationships, the memories, and experiences that were gained, and then see the good, show gratitude, and then allow yourself to move on. Speaking of the past from number 11, which we just talked about, stop giving the power to the past, which it doesn't deserve. When we ensure the events in the past of which we have control over have ended as best as we can possibly allow, it can make the past easier to relinquish. So number 12 is pay particular attention to endings. Number 13 is to refrain from feeling helpless. This one I'm going to keep short and sweet because I think it's pretty straightforward. But a sense of helplessness is a choice. It's a choice to be negative. As pointed out in number 7, when we build the skills of hope, optimism, trust, and confidence, helplessness has no place. So number 13, refrain from feeling helpless. Number 14, stop giving your emotions so much power over your actions. As teenagers and even as early 20-year-olds, our minds are not yet fully developed. In fact, they are not entirely developed until approximately the mid-20s, 25, 26. The understanding of what we should actually be fearful of has not fully developed up until that age. And so irrational emotions, as observed by adults, can feel completely legitimate to the younger generation going through that particular experience. Keeping this in mind as we come to recognize our emotions and not allow them to hold sway over our decisions, what we come to find is that within 24 hours, most emotions have dissipated, the highs and the lows. As such, so long as we haven't acted upon the impulses that had been provoked, we are usually quite thankful we didn't trust the emotional response, had it have yielded something we would have regretted later. And if this is something that is of interest to you, I actually did an episode on this last year called Mastering Your Mind, and I'll provide a link to it on today's show notes if you're interested underneath point 14. Number 15 is to increase your enduring level of happiness. A couple of years ago, I wrote an entire post on the difference between pleasure and joy. And while enjoying moments of pleasure throughout your day, simple luxuries, after all, are a must to heighten the everyday experience. And I talk about them on the blog, and I've talked about them on this episode, this podcast before. And I have many, many, many hashtags on my Instagram feed with just that statement, simple luxuries. The key, however, is to understand the difference and each's importance in cultivating a happy life, joy versus pleasure, enduring level of happiness or temporary level of happiness. So what constitutes something that will feed or increase our enduring level of happiness? As defined by Dr. Seligman, it is an activity consistent with the noble purpose. Gratification, or joy, as I've called it in the past, enacts personal strengths and our virtues. It employs those. And when we use those to create or to cultivate something in our lives, that creates an enduring level of happiness. Reflecting back on number 9, this is where your strengths come into play. When you choose to strengthen those, your strengths that is, you begin to see how you can tie it to a grander purpose for your life's work or your legacy to remember long after you are gone. Most often, enduring happiness offers no shortcuts. The path to feeling enduring happiness takes time, work, dedication, and clarity about your purpose and direction. But by definition, when we pursue joy, we establish a lasting happiness rather than a fleeting moment of pleasure. So number 15 is to increase your enduring level of happiness. Number 16 is to respect momentary happiness. I know you're just talking about enduring happiness, but I don't want to totally leave out momentary happiness out in the cold. There is a benefit to it. There are benefits to it. There are immense benefits to it. It's about striking the balance. But it's also about understanding the difference. Momentary happiness pursuits, otherwise known as pleasure pursuits, aren't all bad. In order to incorporate in a helpful and healthy manner moments of happiness, we first need to understand the 3 all-important qualities: habituation, savoring, and mindfulness. Let me just kind of define each of these 3. And these are parts of momentary happiness. Think about any of those things that bring you pleasure. Maybe fleeting, maybe temporary, but these are examples of momentary happiness. Habituation is that you spread the experiences far enough apart that you derive the same pleasure each time. Think about if there's a favorite food you really like, and it may not always be the healthiest thing, but it's something moderation, right? You eat in moderation. So maybe it's that piece of that tiramisu. And if you had tiramisu every single night, you would not derive as much pleasure as you did the first time. So you spread it out. You have it once a month. You have it once, whatever it is. It's going to depend on the pleasure, depending on how much you space it out. But you want to make sure you have the same pleasure each time, and that requires you to space it out. Savoring is awareness of the pleasure and the deliberate conscious attention to the experience of the pleasure. So putting yourself presently in that moment, which is very similar to mindfulness, but then you're truly thinking about what it is you're feeling. You're really letting go of all rational thought. You're just lost in the emotions of it. You forget about your worries. You forget about the future. And for those, that's why we can't dive into pleasure 24/7 or our lives will fall apart. But we can have those small little bouts of pleasure. That's okay. And the third one is mindfulness. Mindfulness, and we've talked about this many times on this episode, on this podcast, as well as the blog. Mindfulness is seeing the present moment anew. It's when you are noticing the little things that you could easily walk by and not even realize, oh, those are birds chirping, or the grass is green, or the sky is blue. We take sometimes those things for granted. So mindfulness, whatever it is, the pleasure is that you're enjoying, you are appreciating all the little details that make it what it is that you appreciate so much about it. So enjoy that piece of chocolate. Make out madly with your partner, and absolutely indulge in House of Cards each season. Just make sure while you are doing so that you are keeping each of these 3 components in mind: habituation, savoring, and mindfulness. So number 16 is respect momentary happiness. 17 is cultivate a social life that achieves the right balance for you. This one I pay very close attention to, and I'll explain why. Based on all the books I have read on being an introvert, and I am a self-defined introvert, along with the psychology books on happiness, including Authentic Happiness, which I've mentioned many times today on today's episode, I'm going to offer my own advice on the effects of a rich social life and happiness. Dr. Seligman shares that happy people spend the least amount of time alone and most of their time socializing. When I read this, I instantly froze because that definition of happiness sounds absolutely miserable to me. And I know that's not going to be the same response to all of you, but I do have a feeling it will have a similar response to some of you. And what I'm thinking about when I read this immediately is that Susan Cain reported in her book Quiet in 2012 that while two-thirds of the population are extroverts, self-identifying as extroverts, there's a third of us that are introverts. Introverts covet time alone and find great satisfaction in this pursuit. And to be fair to Seligman, whose book came out in 2004, Quiet was released in 2012, as I just mentioned. So perhaps there wasn't access to the information that she had. I don't know. But keeping both of their findings in mind, the key is, yes, we do need human interaction. I'm not denying that. It is a means to feeling happy. But to what degree, frequency, and depth of intimacy is going to be based entirely on you, the individual, and your needs, your sensitivities, what fuels you, what drains you. My advice, and based on my experience and having talked to a handful of close friends who also self-identify as introverts, it is up to us to cultivate the social network that works best for us. Listen to yourself, trust yourself, and then invest in cultivating a social environment that works best for you. So 17 is just that. Cultivate a social life that achieves the right balance for you. Last but not least is to practice gratitude. The long shared piece of life advice is to exude gratitude regularly. Whether it is at the end of each day, writing in a journal, reminding yourself of all the small and large events and moments that went well, or simply sitting quietly in the morning with your cup of tea or coffee, lost in thought, allowing yourself to smile as you recall the amazing life you are fortunate to live. Practice this. Practice having gratitude, and those pesky negative thoughts will have less room to roam unchecked. So number 18 is practice gratitude. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I had fun researching this. I enjoyed breaking it down, and I hope it was helpful. Oftentimes what we need when it comes to happiness is simply a reminder of how to cultivate a happier life for ourselves and those we love. Hopefully today's episode can serve as a checklist of sorts to keep with you as you bring back these habits. I have a feeling you knew about a lot of them that I mentioned today, but maybe there were some new ones, and you can welcome those into your life habits as well, and they will then eventually become habits and second nature and further help materialize a life you infinitely are grateful to have the opportunity to experience. For all of today's show notes, visit the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast79. The books I mentioned, the equation I mentioned at the top of the hour, and each of the points that we talked about will be broken down in the show notes. It will also include a handful of similar posts from the archives, the one I mentioned about the difference between pleasure and joy. I will also include one with regards to money and how it does bring happiness into our lives, but also the limits of money as well. So feel free to stop by thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast79. And now it's time for this week's Petit Plaisir. I'll see you in just a moment. Since we're on the topic of happiness, I thought this Petit Plaisir would be ideal for today's episode. Now, it is something very simple, very, very simple, and it is something that I have somewhat mentioned in the past, but not in the capacity I'm going to mention it today. And what it is to buy flowers each week on your weekly grocery run. Now, I know not everyone lives nearby to a Trader Joe's, and I also know that in winter, flowers can be hard to find, and if you do find them, they can be rather expensive. But the amazing part about Trader Joe's is that you can get a small bouquet of amaryllis for less than $5, and they last for almost 2 weeks, which is absolutely amazing. This is not a big budget breaker, but it's something that has quite the power when you walk in after work. Maybe it's a busy day, maybe you're exhausted, whatever it is. Flowers are just like adding that extra little accessory that just finishes the outfit. No matter how clean your home is, having some sort of green flowering plant, even just green leaves, green branch, whatever it is. In the springtime, I love the willow branches. That just makes me smile. And studies have shown that flowers also do make you happy. So I'm not just the only one saying it. I know you guys know this as well. In the past, I've talked about on Petit Plaisirs, the idea of a monochromatic bouquet. But in this case, keep it simple. Maybe it's just one bud of a hydrangea that you put on the middle of your dining room table in a bud vase. Or maybe it's just a simple bouquet on your coffee table of the cheapest flower, but at least you have some color in your house. It's really up to you. It doesn't have to break the bank, but I highly recommend it. And to provide some inspiration on today's show notes, I provided an image that I shared on my Instagram feed this weekend, as well as a couple other images I captured over the past month of flowers that I've picked up on my weekly grocery run that have been, all of them have been at Trader Joe's, and none of them have run more than $8. So do with this what you will, but I think you'll be amazed by simple little touches each week and what it can do to the end of your day, to the morning, to however you spend time in your house. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petit Plaisir, where each week ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each Monday's podcast, where I'll recommend a book, a film, a recipe, or an everyday habit, or a weekly habit in this case, that will help you live simply, luxuriously. Anything that is a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. Thank you for tuning in to the SImple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, stop by the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pick up the book, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide. Until next Monday, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonjour!